Welcome to the show, Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain. And I'm really, really pleased. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with amazing guest, Dr. Ron. Welcome to the show.
So much for having me. Appreciate it.
You're most welcome. So for those that don't know Dr. Ron, he is the founder of the Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine, one of the rare facilities to deliver functional and integrative medicine for the insured population. He is also the host for the upcoming 2023 Better Brain Health Summit, which will be streamed online. And I'm really excited, looking forward to that and learning more about that in the upcoming weeks and months. So I look forward to that. And we got connected through the amazing Fallon Jordan, I believe, through the AIM Clinic. So, who's also been on the show. So welcome. So before we dive into your story and the topic for today, which is really, I'd love to talk about belief systems. Could you tell me what you're passionate about in life right now?
I think that whenever we look at passions, it really is chipped away from us and we kind of mold it into something that is our own story. So a lot of my passions come from my own stories dealing with brain health. So obviously I'm exceptionally passionate about brain health just due to the number of concussions and all this other stuff that I've had before. But more importantly, I think I'm passionate about delivering on the message that you can do something about your brain health, and most of it is within our control. And I just wish people knew that. So that's my main passion.
Yeah. Do you know, I love that. I think people often are given this belief that they don't have any control over how their brain has evolved. They think they're stuck with their brain. There's no ability to change it. Their diagnosis is their diagnosis, and that's kind of it. And they just have to live with their symptoms. But actually, we have a huge amount of power and a huge amount of control over how our brain works, how it functions, how it operates, and how we can get the best out of it, not just how it is now, but actually optimize it for the future, irrespective of the age we're at, which is why I love brain health so much myself.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So I'd love to know, what would you say optimal brain health is for you personally in the context of your life's journey and also being a doctor of medicine?
Yeah, sure. So I'll kind of start by looking at observations first. And it's observing patients. So in Texas here, I practice integrative and functional medicine, but we do so in the elderly population, the insured population, the people who don't have a lot of resources as well, right? So we do take a lot of government assistance and government assisted programs as well. So there's a lot of stuff out there. You can get certain diets and supplements and stuff like that. Well, not everyone have the resources to access that. So I get really obsessed a little bit about data. So but if we look at the data of a lot of people who are in this category of brain health, when I say brain health, I mean physical brain health or even mental health as well. So I lump it to one thing. If we look at this category, who are the people that have the best transformations? And if you actually look at the data, it's people who kind of change their belief systems into thinking that they can actually heal. Because no matter what, if people have this sort of belief system that they're going to continue to spiral down, not a whole lot of change can occur because people don't let it occur. And so part of looking at the data is looking at other disease associations associated with like brain and cognitive health. So I hold an expertise in looking at EEG technologies. So electroencephalogram, basically, it's looking at electrical signals of the brain. And when we look at these electrical signals of the brain, there's some very big similarities between belief systems and mental health and actual like traumatic brain injury and even dementia. And the physiology of the brain is so similar that I believe that there shouldn't be a separation between brain and mental health. It's really just kind of one category, but what patterns we look at. So And by looking at these patterns over the last 7 years, thousands of different brains we're looking at, we can see that a lot of people with belief systems that are kind of rooted in depression and anxiety are also rooted in trauma, like psychological trauma, as well as emotional trauma, as well as concussive trauma, stuff like that. And so what happens is that I'm able to screen people with mental and brain health disorders and categorize them into different categories, right? And so the biggest category is what I like to call the sleepy brain. The sleepy brain literally means that the brain frequency is so low that during the daytime, people are kind of sleepy, but it feels like depression, and it feels like anxiety, and it feels like chronic fatigue, right? And it feels like you're lazy, because society has told us that we're lazier than the average person, or we're more anxious than the average person. And I think that there's a lot of belief systems in society that labels the way that we feel it's not congruent with our actual physiology. So people feel like they're in this secular part of society, that they're not, quote unquote, normal.
Yeah. Do you know, I just want to pause you there, because I think that's such an important point, that society, our society belief systems act as an enormous influence on how we see ourselves in terms of our brain health. And it's, society can put us in this bucket where we could be diagnosed with any kind of mental health issue or brain health issue, whatever it happens to be, whether it's Alzheimer's disease, whether it's Lyme's disease, depression, any of it. And actually the societal belief system that is wrapped around those words associated with your diagnosis can become your own belief system and really hinder you in your progress. And actually, we also had Rex Miller on the show. His daughter went to the Amen Clinic, and she was incorrectly diagnosed before they went to the Amen Clinic, and it was a struggle to unravel the belief system that she'd been given based on her previous diagnosis, because she had accepted that as the label, that was who she was. And actually many of the labels that we have in terms of our brain health that have been evolved over time are just that. They're just a label to describe a symptom. It's not necessarily even the root cause of our struggle. And it certainly doesn't have to define who we are. And we can turn that label around and turn it into a superpower if we want to do so.
If we choose to, absolutely. Yeah. we can appreciate that, whatever we focus on is what we get in life, right?
Right.
And if we focus on the diagnosis that others may have put upon us, and we focus on the lack of validation of these symptoms, that's what we're going to get. Unfortunately, that's where the society comes in, right?
Yeah.
There's been a massive change. And you talk about the Amen Clinic, which, by the way, I'm sitting across the street from the Amen Clinic here in Dallas. Actually just got my head scan this morning. So as we're looking at new imaging and modalities, I use the quantitative EEG, Dr. Amen used the SPECT.
So I've had QEEG as well, so I completely understand, where you're at, is looking at your brain patterns, and it measures your thought processes and looks at how your brain is functioning. And it's particularly good for head trauma as well. So
it is, but what it does, it kind of validates you, because it takes a look at your brain, the QEEG, and it compares, how do you compare to other people, called a standard deviation in statistics, like how far away you're from the normal in each part of the brain. So if your temporal lobe is really far off, then yes, you're going to have emotionality and all these different issues, but is that a psychological thing? It may not be. So here's what's interesting, is that there are really common disease associations when we look at the data, like sleep apnea being the number one disease associated with all mental health disorders. Doesn't matter if it's bipolar, schizophrenia, anxiety, depression, what it is, right? And then there's other things like chronic histamine issues, like chronic allergies, and even dental infections. So the data has gotten so good right now. In our facility, I can identify someone who potentially has a dental infection or chronic sinus issues that's causing anxiety and sleep impairments just by looking at the QEEG. So even something as simple as that to pull the lever on is a huge implication in the brain and mental health process. And we see that in the data we have in our facility, right? So that's a whole other belief system that I've kind of realized over the last few years, looking at thousands of these brain maps. Does that make sense?
And I know you mentioned that some people don't have the financial resource to get all of the supplementation perhaps, or the additional support that would be best in class to help them enhance their brain health, but that ought not to prevent people from getting better or becoming optimal. And I'd love to explore that point that you made earlier.
Yeah, let me break that down. Once we find the pattern, a lot of the tools that we provide for the patients has nothing to do with purchasing something. It has to do with belief systems and breathing. those two things.
Yeah.
So we made an online university about this. So if you go to www.tclmuniversity.com, which is actually in the little scrolling thing below here, on there is a section called Mind Sculpting Master Workshop. It's actually to retrain our belief systems into something that's far more powerful that serves us. And in that, we teach breathing techniques from yogic breathing to box breathing, Wim Hof, et cetera, to mindfulness and meditation. Those tools you can find anywhere now. You can even find them on YouTube and stuff like that. Those are far more powerful tools than taking like a B vitamin and stuff like that. Now, why is that? Now, the reason that's more powerful is because, one, you can do it every day. It's unlimited. Two, it's free. And three, it's essential to the process. Supplements are supplemental. They're not essential to the process. But breathing is essential to the process, right? And so we know, based on a lot of data out there, that different breath techniques is able to change the way that we actually create signals and receive signals in our brain over a long period of time. The more we do it, the better it is, just like exercising, right? And so, for example, that's something that anyone can actually do, but that's where the focus really has to be, right? And then the belief system. So belief system is based on relationships. A lot of people have support systems, and some people have what I like to call the anti-support systems, the sabotagers. And you know what I mean, right? And so, so leveraging these support systems and understanding who's really in your corner or who seems to be in your corner, and recognizing that and knowing that there are some people that can trigger us in specific ways. And we see this in different relationships, spouses, we see those, mother-daughter relationship, et cetera. And creating safety in those relationships is so much more powerful than any supplement that you can take, right? So that's why
totally.
And relationship with yourself too.
Right. I think that's so important, because we can spend so much of our time looking out at the relationship with others and have really great relationships with people external to ourselves, but be in a really toxic relationship with ourselves and really not learning to love ourselves and love who we are and love our brain. In fact, often we neglect the most important organ or in our body that pretty much runs everything. And have a really poor relationship with our brain.
And that's such a great point, because in our facility we have tools for everything. We have neurofeedback, we have access to refer to hyperbaric chambers and ozones and IV therapies, supplements. None of that matters if you don't get your relationship with yourself and others in order, if you don't get your breath in order. Those still are the two most fundamental things. And a lot of people who come seeking us out for a lot of these other modalities, and sometimes we purposely just stop them before they go there, because a lot of times they want to kind of neglect other things other than focus on the relationship with themselves or even the breathing process. So we're very much like fundamentalist essentialists, right? Like get the essential stuff improved first, and then we move on to the next phase.
And I think that's really, really important. And I love the fact that you are doing that, because so often people look for that external quick fix.
Yes.
They think that nutraceuticals or supplements can get them out of a bad diet, or exercise can get them out of a bad diet, or therapy can get them out of a bad relationship. But they don't take the time to look internally and do the internal work on themselves and look at the relationship they have with themselves, which ultimately is the building block for everything else.
Right.
That defines the relationship we have with food, that defines the relationship we have with others. If we don't love ourselves, it's hard to effectively love other people over the long term. And it's within our control.
Absolutely. Let me just kind of validate that for a second, because I didn't know that a few years ago. So a lot of times when people come in, we gave them what we wanted. Here's a supplement protocol, here's a nutraceutical protocol, here's a nutrition protocol, here's X, Y, and Z, right? IV, stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm a data guy, which means that if there's no success in something, like, we would know it. So statistically speaking, all that is sort of in the zone of distraction for most people.
Yeah.
And it's not until we looked at the belief systems and structures that we accidentally stumbled into this sort of mindfulness sort of as the number one. Now, how did that happen? So 2018, I looked at data points of people improving a lot of disease states, not just mental health, but like autoimmune disease and diabetes, stuff like that. All the miracle changes, of these patients started after some life event, a death of a family member or a divorce or even a marriage. So some life event, whether it's a good or bad life event, it's a life event, and they had to redefine themselves. And all of a sudden, in their blood work, things look different. They look like a different human when we look at them physiologically. The wrinkles start going on. I'm like, what's going on? And then that's when we start adopting mind-body medicine into our practice. And then, boom, people were changing left and right, and it was really fabulous to see, without going down the route of sort of distraction, right? Of all these crazy things that are out there. So you don't have to have like $2 million worth of biohacking, tools to to really improve the brain health. It really honestly starts with belief systems and relationships and mindfulness.
And you know what? Having interviewed people like Mark Edmondson, who was diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer and given a year to live, he was offered all of these external treatments, but the big change factor for him was his belief system, and knowing that he could beat it, and knowing that he had the power to take back control and do what was necessary himself personally to improve his life. And actually that diagnosis radically changed his life's trajectory and helped him optimize his lifestyle to suit his needs and that of his family's needs, because the family became really important. And he's survived, stage 4, he had multiple lesions in his liver. He's now survived for 5 years and just been given the all clear, based on a diagnosis of one year to live, and everything looking very suboptimal for him. But the one thing that he said that helped him get through, which is the first thing that I have in the academy that we have, is the primary thing to focus on your belief. So you've got to believe you can overcome your obstacles, that you're capable of overcoming, and then you've got the power to succeed and soar.
Absolutely. And one thing that we really found as a practice is that a lot of belief systems really come from our childhood, right? The way that we were raised, our parents and stuff like that. And there may be a set of belief systems that have served us well for most of our lives, but there comes to a point in time where it no longer serves us. And there's a guilt associated with getting rid of that belief system, right? And I think, and I'm taking myself, for example, I was raised in a very strict Chinese family. I'm an immigrant to the United States. My childhood was spent in China. So a lot of the sort of the immigrant mentality and the belief systems were there is the immigrant mentality is neglect ourselves and do whatever we need to survive, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm 38 years old. I'm no longer in survival mode, so that sort of belief system no longer serves me. But at the same time, it's always kind of there, and it really changes the way it didn't change. It actually ingrains in the way I do things, even without thinking about it, from my subconscious mind. And I noticed that if I'm around my dad or my parents and they say something, it triggers right there and then without even me knowing it. So a lot of the subconscious belief systems is there, and there is a guilt in trying to like almost unravel or undo all of that, right? And especially I live with my parents, and that's what a lot of Chinese people do, live in a giant household with different generations. That's my typical household with my daughters and my parents and stuff. So that relationship is always there, but it's not that I'm frowning upon the relationship that was built before, but that belief system no longer serves me, and I have to like consciously think about it to say, oh, I gotta stop doing this, right? And flip that script around. And that's a very hard thing to do.
But the great thing is you're consciously doing it, which
Yeah.
is such an important thing, because often the belief systems that we have are running in the background of our mind, and they're running in our subconscious mind, where most of our emotions are held. We have a lot of things in our background operating system that are running from a mind perspective, but the fact that you are consciously bringing it to the forefront of your mind and activating that logical thinking part of your brain, which is your prefrontal cortex, and giving yourself the space and the time to challenge it, allows us to give ourselves back the power to manage our subconscious. And I think that's such an important part of understanding our belief systems, is taking the time, like you said, is to bring it to your conscious awareness and go, this is my belief system from my past. Is this or isn't this serving my brain health or me and my family, or whatever the situation happens to be going forward? Do I want to continue or change it? And what's within my power to change?
Right. And you're absolutely right. And also, one of the tricks is, because I act in my subconscious, I don't know what I'm doing sometimes. So I rely a lot on my 8-year-old. I rely on her. I rely on my wife. I rely on the people that are around me and saying, hey, if you see patterns that may not serve me, like, call me out on it. I'm okay with it. Right.
Yeah.
And so I mean, as early as, my wife and I's anniversary was very recently, and something just triggered me of this phrase. I didn't even know why, but she called me out on it. So I just took a pause. Like, oh yeah, that's my old circuitry happening.
Yeah.
And having people around me that do that is something that I rely on. I used to hide it. I used to be very proud. The doctor, I'll do X, Y, and Z. I'm a very, very proud person. And I realized that also didn't serve me.
And how did it affect you? Because I know a lot of people, especially men, and I hate to call it out, but that's just the reality, is men tend to have a habit of not talking about it. And there's this big drive from a mental health perspective, is encouraging men to talk about the internal dialogue that's going on, the internal belief systems and the internal fears and worries and emotions that they tend to harbor, especially given your amygdala is actually bigger than a female's amygdala typically on average. How did that affect you in your day-to-day, or how did the not talking about it impact you personally? Did it have a notable impact?
Not talking about things is most of my life. I was taught to avoid things because, my parents grew up in China during the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, where most of my dad's side was imprisoned for being medical professionals at that time. There was a huge Cultural Revolution going on. And my father spent most of his childhood sneaking food into the jail cell for my grandfather, right?
Wow.
But I didn't know that when I was younger. And so these stories came a lot later. But I noticed that the patterns that he's exhibiting, all he's trying to do is to keep me fed and out of jail too, right? And I think that's created his survival mechanism. But I saw myself doing the exact same thing, like growing up in the US, but I've always been in a safe place. My father's kept me safe. So, me and my father butt heads a lot, well, before, but now I'm starting to realize all he's trying to do is show his version of love. But to get there was a lot of conflict. It was a lot of things that were just not said. And it's my dad, the greatest communicator in the world. No, he doesn't say anything about his feelings still, but I'm okay with that because I recognize it. And I have to constantly tell myself I'm going to love him whether or not he's going to show any emotion or not. I'm not tied to that outcome, right? But before that realization, everything that I did, my relationship with my wife, my kids, everything that was about me was ingrained in that fight or flight, war-torn mental mechanism, if you will, right? And that really didn't serve me as a business owner too, as an entrepreneur, because I was a team leader, and building teams that operate in fight or flight is catastrophic from a business perspective. And I had to unlearn and undo a lot of that stuff because I was suffering that from on the professional side, right?
What was I'd love to explore, if you will, a little bit of the suffering that you experienced, both from a internal perspective and also from a connection externally with people within your team and building your business, because I think we kind of don't necessarily acknowledge the knock-on impact not talking about stuff and not acknowledging stuff has on us until we crash. Often we have to wait for a crash until we pay attention. It's like our body says no because our mind isn't listening.
Yes.
And that's often where people get to, whether the crash is a terminal one. Hopefully it doesn't turn out that way, but some people, often it's with it, having a massive crash psychologically.
Right. So my crash was not terminal, thank God.
Yeah.
But this is what crashes look like. You feel like you're at the bottom, and you become sort of your worst enemy, right? And this happened at multiple points in my life, and I'm sure everyone can relate because everyone has crashes. But how you rise out of them is completely up to you, And what it looks like is that I felt like my relationships around me were not the way I intended to be. And there was a lot of like self-victimizing, which occurs especially in my early 20s, and especially after so many concussions to playing sports and doing all sorts of stupid things. And every time I had concussive injury, it just accentuated my personality. It's accentuated my subconscious triggering mechanisms even more. And none of that was really serving me. So I want people listening that are out there to realize that we've already suffered a lot of ups and downs, but taking the lessons from all those downtimes and progressing forward, that's how we improve things, And now, it's cool because I kind of teach my kids that whenever they're acting a certain way, and I start kind of labeling it and just loving them no matter what for it, it allows open communication even with an 8-year-old, and that gives me a lot of joy. But all those things that I experienced just from different downturns in life, I see my patients going through the same things, whether it's relationships with themselves or other people, different parts of life. And then the age doesn't even matter,
No.
It's not even about the age, or it's just about the fact that we always have to keep going, and we're human, which means we collect experiences.
Yeah.
And and things are either tragic, if we want it to be tragic, or we can use that tragedy and say, hey, what are those things, the patterns around that tragedy that no longer serves me, and move forward. So that made me a bit of more of an optimistic person. Going on through life.
And I think it's so important. I often, when I was in my early teens and early 20s, did really stupid stuff, and I often with my mum would often say, well, it's not you, it's something else. And so I had this belief system that I didn't need to change. But actually the reality was it's a relationship. So when something isn't working out between you and something else or someone else, you've kind of got to look at the dynamic between that's you and something else and work out what part of that dynamic can you influence and control, and then work on that bit and not spend time trying to influence and control the other person's half of that dynamic, but focus on you personally. And it's really easy, isn't it, to focus on the other person and kind of do the finger pointing sometimes, or the pushing away and say, well, it's not me, it's you, or it you know, it's got nothing to do with me. And I certainly did that for a long time. In fact, I think probably up until I really understood the importance of brain health and realised I had an awful lot of power to take back control. But like you said, it happens at any age. And I noticed my daughter recently, she's only 3.5, but she had a big sulk on when we went to a play area, an indoor play, and you know, became really insular and inward, and sat on the floor and crossed her legs and folded her arms and got into a huge huff. Because she said, I'm sad, mummy, because you're not playing with me, because I was busy just having a cup of coffee with people. But the fact that she had that ability to communicate, whereas some people just go quiet and go into a sad state.
Yes.
But she had learnt the power to communicate her emotions.
Right.
Was a great thing. But if we don't teach people how to connect with their emotions and how to understand why they're behaving the way they do and what internal belief systems are causing them to behave the way they are, then it's very hard for people to unravel it, isn't it?
And that's really mature of her to tell you exactly how she felt. That's a huge victory, you know.
Yeah.
Some people,
I was very proud of her.
That's great, because some people see it as a
Yeah.
huge failure because, like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing XYZ for my child. I was like, but the fact that your child told you that is a huge deal. I would
Yeah.
never have done that when I was a kid. I would have
Yeah.
been physically hit, you know, by my grandmother if doing that, because you don't say that to an elder in Chinese culture, back in China, right? And so, and even right now, like my kids are very, they can be very emotional, but they always say what their emotion feels like, and you know, and they live with my parents, and my parents aren't used to that. They're not used to kids being so like there and saying things that they almost get, not almost, they do get uncomfortable, you know, at times. Sometimes they just look at me to be sort of the moderator of certain things, right?
Yeah.
And so I have to like hold back myself, thinking that okay, they're looking at me, not saying that, hey, why are your kids so unruly, like get into shape. They're looking at me for really direction of how to like deal with this, from because they're grandparents and they love their grandchild, right? And so it's a very huge generational, you know, difference. But at the same time, I know that a lot of what my kids are doing now, just like your 3-year-old, is that they're really modeling behavior of what we promote, you know, currently, and that changes not just them, but 6, 7, 8 generations down the line in our lineage, right? And that really halts generational trauma.
Yeah, and you know, I can really relate to your experience that you had with your family, because my dad struggled to talk about his emotions when he was alive, and I think that a lot of that was possibly due to his childhood experiences. He was born at the beginning of the war. His father was away during the war. He had to be the man of the house because he was the oldest, and you know, he went to a boarding school when he didn't want to, and there were a whole heap of things wrapped up in that. But it was very difficult for him to talk about his emotions because it would overwhelm him when he did, and sometimes he would kind of explode. You know, you'd trip him and he'd get really angry. And I think that, you know, I always think about that in terms of managing my emotions, because I kind of used to be like him. You know, I'd bottle it up, and then suddenly the lid would come off in a catastrophic explosion, and I would kind of lose it a little bit. And I think it's important that we learn how to manage those internal operating systems, which are driven by, our emotions, our beliefs, our thoughts, and the environment is such a huge influencer on all of that, to make sure that we are serving ourselves and not just serving others.
And we deserve to serve ourselves too. That's another limiting belief that I had. It's like, oh, I don't deserve any of this. But we have to come to the fact that we do deserve to serve ourselves, so we can serve others as well.
Right.
But I kind of want to tie the belief system. So I know we're talking about brain health, but I want to tie the belief system into our entire body, not really just our brain, right? So let's get a little bit sciencey for a second.
Oh yeah, definitely. Let's go for it.
So I want to take this topic called autoimmune disease. And autoimmune disease just means that your body is no longer congruent with the trajectory that your life's taking. That's kind of my definition of autoimmune disease. So your body creates these autoimmune molecules that attack our cells, right?
Yeah.
It literally attacks our DNA. I mean, that's what lupus is. We create things that attack our own DNA, right? And so whether it's like Hashimoto's or lupus or autoimmune encephalitis or any of these terms, we in our data set at Texas Center for Lifestyle Medicine, the people who have these miracle cases where they no longer have autoimmune disease or reverse it, it's not a specific diet or something, it's also a belief system that's there as well. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times I see these people with all these long lists of medical disorders. And these medical disorders, once we tap into the subconscious state in the belief system, you see all of the biomarkers get better. The autoimmune markers get better. The blood sugars get better. Insulin resistant markers get better. Cholesterol gets better, et cetera, et cetera. And so that shows you that our brain is so powerful. It can create diseases and disorders to slow us down, to force us into taking a glance and look at life. And all the other fancy tools that we have to look at other things like viruses and infections and Lyme disease and mold and stuff like that, but we have a lot of tools for that. These are just observations of the end product of what's been going on here in our heads. And so the idea is that if we start with a belief system that most diseases are actually all in our head, and thank goodness for it, that means we can manipulate our belief systems so that diseases no longer are compatible with our body. And I'm a firm believer of that because I see it all the time in practice, right? And so that's really what I want to tie into belief system, and not just brain health, like the entire body.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's such an important point, and the fact that you've got the biomarkers and the data to support it. But how you've grown up in a medical belief system,
yes,
that has been radically different to functional and integrative medicine, which is where that's what I am most interested in, and what's what is working by looking at the whole system, not just looking at the symptom. How is that belief system within the profession shifting or stuck? Because we're not just we started the conversation, didn't we, about belief systems within society influence our own belief systems, and they massively do in the context of the medical profession, because people can get hugely hung up on what they get taught in medical school, for example.
I did.
And the reality is, actually, science has moved on hugely, and on understanding and the power of our body and our mind is hugely shifted to what you were probably taught in medical school. But the belief systems of the people that are supporting those that want help have not necessarily shifted to the level that yours have. How is the how wide is the gap, or how much more work do we need to do in order to facilitate that change in the approach to helping people get better?
That's a really good question, because I have a company that actually trains and advises for doctors practicing medicine, and not just integrative medicine, but all sorts of different things. Here's the thing, and that I really want people to understand. There's we call this a selection bias. Selection bias is this is select type of persons that go into the medical profession, nursing, doctor, and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And these are the persons who, and when I say persons, because there's different types of people here. These are the persons that enjoy sort of the hero's mentality, okay? And the hero's mentality is that, hey, I will wield the sword for you and fight this dragon for you, the patient, right?
Yeah.
In reality, that is not a healthy relationship because it's a codependent relationship. In reality, doctors and healthcare professionals should be the guide so that the patients can be their own heroes.
Absolutely.
We're not taught that in med school. We're not taught that in
Yeah.
residency. So what happens is the hero of the story, which is the doctor, may be fighting a completely different war than the patient. The doctor is fighting the war is, I have all these beautiful swords and tools for you. This could be like a medication. This could be, a consultation or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And you don't value any of my weapons. I can't help you, right? And that is the biggest belief system rift between the conventionally, medical practices and even the hospital systems and the public. But think about what happened during the global pandemic. People were taking health into their own hands, and there's a lot of even fight between doctors as well. There's different belief systems that are really coming out. And the idea is that doctors start fighting different wars. There's wars about everything now. So there's a lot of interprofessional hate right now. If you just look at social media, and it's really unnecessary. And it's unnecessary because we as physicians should really be the guide so that the patient can be their own heroes. However, no one's taught us to do that. There's no educational body in the United States that I know of that teaches this outside of, Center for Mind Body Medicine and stuff like that. Is the role of the doctor has to be in the guidance format, not the hero.
Yeah.
And the difference is heroes are really tied to the person's outcomes, meaning that you come to see me as a doctor, I am tied to your outcome, even emotionally tied to your outcome. That's actually not the best thing to do. That creates a lot of burnout. Now, if I detach myself from your outcome and I say, hey, here are the tools, and whether you choose to use the tools or not, that's totally based on you. And if you don't use it, that's fine. Maybe you're not ready for it, or maybe you want another route, and that's okay. The medical system does not teach us to let go of that, and that creates a massive amount of burnout. So whether we call it functional integrative health or whatever health it is, I don't think any of that labeling really matters. Is the reality of the situation is if you look at these senior doctors who are quite happy, they all have stepped into the guidance role. We need to fast forward to that mentality.
Do you know, I think that's such a brilliant point because, if we think of the person that has got the struggle, whatever that may happens to be, I like to think of it as that they have to become their own warrior for their health. And to be an effective warrior isn't just about equipping yourself with the tools like you would do in a game and getting all these lightsabers. You have to get the energy and the mindset, as you would if you were physically on the battlefield. It's no good if you've got all of the weapon systems if you don't actually have the ability to hold them, for example, or you don't have the internal belief system that you can actually conquer that, whatever the struggle is, or that enemy that's within you or external to you, whatever, in the context of environmental impact that affects your whole body health. If you don't have that belief that you can conquer it with the systems that you've been given, or that they are going to empower you to do that, you're not going to win the battle, and you're certainly not going to win the war.
Yeah, and people are fighting different wars, and I'll tell you what. So when patients come into the office, I train my practitioners to do this. It's like before you even start the visit, you have to ask them what war they're fighting. It's like, what is a great outcome that you wished from seeing me, and what is my role in your journey?
Yeah.
That's a very different question than how may I help you. It's a very completely different question. That question anchors the patient in sort of that hero's role, knowing that this is their journey. And so what happens is then the patient will actually tell me exactly what my role is, and I stick to that role. I don't even go beyond that role. A lot of them say, hey, I just want you to guide me down the right path. I don't want to be on medicine, but I want to get my cholesterol down, right? And guess what? If I was a doctor who don't know how to do that, I'll say, you know what? I appreciate you telling me that, but I don't know how to do that. I think someone else can serve you better. And let's see if I can refer you to someone else that can serve you better, right? Because my philosophy is if someone else can serve you better, I'd rather not do it, because I'll be doing you a big disservice. And we have
you'll be guiding them down the wrong path.
Exactly.
You know the paths you can take people down on the mountains that you're able to help them climb. But if you personally don't have the right tools to take them up the mountain that they want to go, as you would do for any mountain guide, you pick the person that's got the experience in that space. And they, and as any professional, it's important to have that confidence to say, do you know what? This is outside of my remit, which is what I do with my clients, and refer them to people such as yourselves, is to say, look, you need to go and talk to Dr. Ron, because he's got this specialist expertise in this space. This is beyond me to support you. Go and talk to Dr. Ron, and he'll be able to help you out.
But I think the issue is because of the selection bias, the type of people who go into medicine who serves as heroes, it's really hard for people to kind of let go of that connection or admit that someone else may serve them better from a subconscious point of view. Not from a conscious, but really from a subconscious point of view, is because that's not why they went into medicine. They went to medicine to become a hero. I mean, just like I did as well. But that belief system from a medical profession no longer serves me. And I try to teach that to other physicians, and when they're able to let go of the hero's role and become a guide, it is such a breath of fresh air for them, and it allows them to practice at a much higher level. And then even their Google reviews improve, and so the perception of the value proposition, the proposed value of the doctor to the patient, has to be in that guidance role.
And I think it's interesting because medical school, you kind of grow up in a very competitive environment. It's known to be highly competitive, and you need to be the best of the best.
Right.
But it's the best of the best for yourself when you're going through education and you're certifying. But when it comes to being a practitioner, it's the best of the best for the person.
Yes, very different.
Which is a very different relationship to the one that is perhaps being driven into your psyche through the educational system. I'd love to dive into the 5 pillars now, if you will, to look at the fun facts, which is the 5 pillars of brain health, which came about my experience. So it's looking at the facts. So we go, let's look at the facts, which is your feelings, your actions, your connections, your thoughts and surroundings, and that makes the 5 pillars of brain health, which is kind of like a stepping stone to get to where you want to go. So let's dive into the first one on feelings, because I know we talked quite a bit about that. What is the funniest or most embarrassing thing that has ever happened to you?
The most embarrassing thing. I'm going to turn red even saying it. But the most embarrassing thing is one time, and I'll never ever.
You have to do some deep breathing or some havening or some tapping to calm your emotional state down.
And this may seem very minute, but when I first started practicing medicine, I was fresh out of residency, first year in practice, and I was doing inpatient critical care and then outpatient as well. And I was just a teenager had just recently passed away under my care from the influenza virus, the flu virus. And I just got through talking to their family, and then I rushed to the clinic because I was 45 minutes late because I was pronouncing her death, right? And then I remember the patient who's never seen me before. It's actually one of my partner's patients at that time in my previous practice. And he's like, I can't believe you're late. You don't value my time. And he just started just going on and on. And in my head, I'm like, well, I literally just pronounced the death of a 17-year-old, and I was trying to get over that from an emotional standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly just started tearing up right in front of the patient. He looked at me for a second, he just left, and I'll never forget that. It was very embarrassing for me.
Yeah.
Because I'm not supposed to be that person. Every patient, you have to like wipe your slate clean for like a brand new thing, right?
Yeah.
He honestly just came because he had a cold, but he doesn't know what I've been through, but he doesn't really have to,
Yeah.
because that was about me and about him. And I realized that moment on, I was like, hey, you know what? I made that interaction about me and not about him. And I really need to validate his feelings. I wish I could go back in time and kind of do things differently.
Oh.
That might seem like a very minor thing, but it affected me for the rest of my career.
Wow. And do you know, I think I'm sure a lot of people who have been in the similar situation where you're in a heightened emotional state, particularly for, trainee doctors. And I used to go out with a doctor who was practicing medicine, and he had many people on his shift who unfortunately passed away, and then having to go and talk to somebody, after that trauma of, at a very young age as well, having to say that is hugely difficult. And I think it's very hard, and we don't give doctors enough credit. It's very hard to manage your emotions when you're in such a heightened emotional state, and ultimately slightly traumatized because you've never had to do it before. So it was the trauma of having to do it and then straight into another experience where you had to turn it off.
Yes.
It is incredibly difficult.
I'll never forget that. So
Thank you for sharing it. And how do you manage it now? How do you manage anything that is, where you have to, where you're in a heightened emotional state, whether it's a trauma or somebody's triggered you for whatever, somebody has passed away that's a patient of yours, or somebody who you knew, and then you have to go and have a very safe conversation with the next patient. How do you manage it now to support yourself?
So really good question. So in that situation, in that very heightened emotional state, I have to sort of detach myself from the outcome. You have to physically just kind of meditate on it and say, hey, it's not my fault that this person passed away. This person had the flu and had a heart attack because of the flu. And it's nothing that we can do about it, right? And so, the current adaptive mechanism is the fact that I am still this person in this family's guide. And there's resources for that. There's hospital resources, there's counseling, all the stuff I didn't know existed before, that I can leverage their expertise for this family. And that would have made me feel a whole lot better, helping them work through the trauma of referring to someone else. So I now no longer get tied to a specific outcome from an emotional state perspective, but just feel it, digest it. Okay, it didn't feel very good. Okay. But be that guidance in that patient's role and patient's family role, and then move on. And it really helps dramatically.
And it's kind of almost like sharing the burden, isn't it? I think that's a really great point, don't carry a burden that you can't shoulder. Pass, and it's not like passing the buck, but give it to a guide who is familiar with that burden that the family is carrying, so that they can help lighten their load. Don't make it your own burden.
Yes. So not surprisingly, after that, I went into hospice medicine and palliative care. So
wow.
That was my career trajectory in the interim after that. So
Yeah. Wow. I'd love to dive into the next one, but we're not going to do all of them just from a time perspective. But based on the topic, which has really been about belief systems, I want to dive into connection to yourself. What is the most important value or values that guide you in life?
It's very broad. Number one is I have to remind myself that I deserve it and to celebrate the small victories.
Yeah.
Last night both my kids were playing with me before I flew to Dallas here, and I made myself celebrate the fact that we're such a close knit family. Where in my childhood we would never have done that.
Yeah.
And so that was a mini win. It was 5 minutes of just playing around, but that was a mini win, right? And so because of that, I tend to take myself less seriously, and which is good because it's okay to laugh at yourself. It's okay to look at certain things and say, oh, that's not what I meant to do or what I meant to say, and project upon that to myself and not other people. A lot of times we project resentment onto the people that are around us, and I've experienced that quite a bit in my life, right?
Yeah.
And so let's just project self inward first and work through those emotions. So I think celebrate the small victories and just pause and think about things that may be triggers are the two things that make the biggest impact in my life.
Yeah, I think that is so important. So often we gloss over the little things in life, and it's often the little things that really matter, and actually the little things that really make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we focus our attention on those, it can hugely elevate our mood and hugely influence how we view the world.
Right.
So I'd love to dive on to the next one because of the belief system is thoughts. What stupid or crazy thought have you often told yourself in the past that isn't true?
I can handle everything that comes at me.
That heuristic hero.
Yeah, it took me a while to figure out that I can't multitask and there's no such thing. And I have the personality where I can start 17 projects but only finish 2. And I have to slow myself down and create outcomes and goals for myself very specifically to overcome that. But this is a very common daily struggle, is that if there's a task at hand, I think I can take it on, but that may not necessarily be true. So I rely on my wife, who will tell me straight up whether or not that's true. She's very good at it. Yeah.
It sounds like you have a very open relationship. It's easy to, bounce off of each other and get the best out of each other by having that open dialogue and not being afraid to be told the truth.
And that
because,
took time.
Know the truth, and the truth will set you free, as they say.
Right, and that took a lot of time and work and energy into our relationship. It was not always roses like this, right?
No.
And so, but we come to a time in our relationship where we realize that over communication is always key.
Yeah, and that belief system that I can handle everything. It is driven by underlying it is often ego, and it's acknowledging the fact that is the driver, and also being okay with the fact that you don't have to be the savior of everything. You don't have to carry the rucksack of all of your family. You can divvy it up.
Yes.
And divide the tasks and accomplish more.
Absolutely.
So I know we've talked about belief systems and the impact that belief systems can hugely have on your brain and whole body health. What one piece of advice would you give to anybody who is struggling with a condition in their life where they've tried all the drugs, they don't feel like they're making the progress that they want to be making, and they know that they need to do something different compared to the traditional approach of medication or supplementation? What one piece of advice would you give to anyone who's in that position?
I have 2.
Okay, that's fine.
The The first one is accept love. The people who are in this type of situation tend to be very lonely, but there's people actively trying to provide them with love, and because they don't feel like they deserve it, they push it away, and they do things that really push it away, and that creates this whole gigantic, monster that's really there, that drives life. And the reason I know this is because I see it in patients all the time, and so that's one piece of advice. And the second piece of advice: don't try to be the hero. In fact, being the hero is probably what drives love away.
Wow.
It's okay to make mistakes, because you're not the hero. You're human, just like everyone else. And if you can take those two pieces of advice to heart, then there's no reason for loneliness. So don't be a hero and accept love.
Yeah. Do you know, I think that's brilliant advice. It's almost like leave your cape at the door, and come in, take off that superhero cape and the superhero costume that you've put around yourself, and then reveal your true identity when you want to really do the deep work. Because it's only, superheroes who have really become great
Right.
are the ones that actually work on their true self, and they take the cape off, and they take all of the clothes off, and they do that work internally. And you have to love yourself in the first instance, and to love yourself will allow you to accept the love from others when you take the time to do that. That's brilliant advice. Wow. Thank you so much for your time on the show today. It's been a fantastic conversation, and something that's so important in the context of unchaining your pain from a brain and whole body health perspective, and something that we don't really spend enough time ever talking about, which is the importance of our belief systems in that journey. How can people get hold of you?
There's several ways. Find me on social media. So it's my name, Cheng Ruan, CHENGRUAN, MD. And you can find me on pretty much all the social medias. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. It's all under the same handle.
Yeah.
And leave a comment or two. I do post some things that are very congruent with the topic that we just talked about when it comes to belief systems and health and stuff like that. And I really I'm curious how people receive it and utilize it.
Yeah, and I think it's a really exciting topic, in the context of healing, because it's not something that is, it's kind of new science in a way, by virtue of the fact that it's not, there's not an enormous amount of data behind it, but there is still a huge amount of data, but it's not generally in the public domain. The importance of our belief systems in changing the outcomes and trajectory of our lives. So I'm so pleased. God, I'm so pleased you're really taking a huge focus on this in the context of the work that you're doing, and I'm really excited for the outcomes that your patients will have, and all of those that you are serving across the work that you do. And I would encourage people to go and check out your website and look at all the courses, because there's some amazing information on there about helping people on their journey to healing, and also from a palliative care perspective. So do please check out Dr. Ruan and the work he's doing, and connect with him. Thank you so much for joining me on my show. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to connecting with you and learning more about your event that's coming up in 2023, and seeing more of the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to like and share this episode, and leave a review on my website or on Apple Podcasts. If you're looking for opportunities to optimize your brain health or unchain your pain from a past trauma, make sure you visit my website, www.ruthmaryallen.com, and use the code podcast10 at checkout to get 10% off all programs. And always remember, you are not stuck with the brain you have. You have the power to make it better. You have the power to unchain your pain and optimize your brain power and performance so that you can win back energy and time doing what you love.
Each episode of Brain Health Unchaining Your Pain with Dr. Ruth Allan is for educational and demonstration purposes only. The information shared in each episode should not be interpreted as medical advice. This episode should not be used to self-diagnose or self-treat any health, medical or physical condition. Do not use this episode to avoid going to your healthcare professional or to replace the advice they give you. Consult with a trusted healthcare professional before doing anything contained in this episode. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact www.ruthmaryallen.com/connect.